All right. Hi, everyone. How is everybody doing today? Today is, as you know, our final class, and it's been a lot of fun doing this, especially the last bit where I've changed it up a little bit, as you know. Um, I'm looking forward to finishing reading Dennett's paper, Quining Qualia, which probably will not take us that long. We only have 9 pages left to go. We will still pause for a break. And after we finish reading this, we'll have a brief wrap-up discussion where we can, if we like, share some insights we've gained from our learning materials, whether those be in regard to the mind or to philosophy more generally. I can take questions concerning the final essay assignment, and then that'll be it, really. Um, I'll miss teaching this for the time being, but I am looking forward to having a little bit of a break at the same time. So, without further ado, let's get back to it. So, previously we worked through the first two-thirds of the paper. Um, we're on the second last section now. Remember, what Dennett is trying to do is to quine away our notions of qualia as these private, ineffable sort of elements of our first person subjective experience. To quine means to deny the existence of. Um, so qualia, remember, Dennett is not denying that conscious experience has properties. He's not saying there's nothing that it's like to exist. Um, but he is trying to dispel the notion that most philosophers work with of qualia. Um, Qualia are not something that we can know. To paraphrase Wittgenstein, um, uh, it might be a something about which nothing can be said, or it might be a nothing. Dennett comes down on the it might be a nothing side. Um, which again, just to reiterate, is not to say that he does not think that our experience has properties, or in other words, that you know that there is not something that it's like to be conscious. But qualia is a bad concept for trying to make sense of our conscious experience. And that's maybe one thing I can talk a little bit about once we wrap up as well. I can tell you a little bit about Dennett's theory of consciousness. I'll try to do justice to it. There's no way that I can do justice to it in the time that we'll have. Um, but if you have questions, I'll try and answer them as best I can. Okay, on to some puzzling real cases, which mirror some of the thought experiments we've looked at. Remember, Dennett is using thought experiments, or as he calls them, intuition pumps, to try and show that there are problems with our notion of qualia. Either that qualia is a nothing, or that it's a something about which nothing can be said. So, and he spent a lot of time on Chase and Sandman, the coffee tasters from Maxwell House. So remember, Mr. Chase thinks that the taste of the coffee hasn't changed, but his tastes have changed. His appreciation for the coffee has diminished. Sundman thinks that it's his tasters that have changed. He thinks that the coffee really does taste different than it used to. Just by way of recap, that's kind of where we are. Now we're going to look at some really interesting real cases from neuroscience that sort of mirror some of these intuition pumps that Dennett has had us look at. So let's begin again with a close reading starting on page 400. It is not enough to withhold our theoretical allegiances until the sunny day when philosophers complete the tricky task of purifying the everyday concept of qualia. And you know what? Right away, I'm going to highlight this because purifying the everyday concept is a nice way of putting, I think, what uh, it's a nice way that Dennett puts what he's really trying to do here. Unless we take active steps to shed this source concept and replace it with better ideas, it will continue to cripple our imaginations and systematically distort our attempts to understand the phenomena already encountered. Highlight that as well. What we find if we look at the actual phenomena of anomalies of color perception, for instance, amply bears out our suspicions about the inadequacy of the traditional notion of qualia. Several varieties of cerebroachromatopsia, which is a brain-based impairment of color vision, have been reported, and while there remains much that is unsettled about their analysis, there is little doubt that the philosophical thought experiments have underestimated or overlooked the possibilities for counterintuitive collections of symptoms, as a few very brief experts from case histories will reveal. Um, so this one is from Antonio Damasio, um, uh, a, um, a neuroscientist of great renown. He actually has an interesting book that you might like to read, depending on what you're doing your essay on, which is called Descartes' Error, um, which concerns the relation between reason and emotion and what light findings from neuroscience can shed on this relationship, which was misconceived by Descartes, Damasio argues. Anyway, here's something strictly neuroscientific from Damasio. Um, cerebral, make sure I pronounce this right, achromatopsia. So without color in topsia. I don't know what the topsia is, but A is without, chroma or chromato is color. So a disorder without color. Objects to the right of the vertical meridian appeared to be of normal hue, while to the left they were perceived only in shades of gray, though without distortions of form. So here we're getting a patient with a curious, uh, a curious brain disorder, um, where on one side of space, on the right side of space, things are perceived as normally colored. And on the left side of space, they're only perceived in shades of gray. This has probably got to do with the nature of the injury or the disease and with the way that the brain is organized. So, a little bit of neuroscientific background here. The human brain, has two cerebral hemispheres and four or five lobes, depending on how you count the mid the limbic system. So you have frontal, temporal, parietal, occipital, and then the limbic system up there, sort of within the brain. And it's organized contralaterally, such that information from, at least if we're talking vision, it's not the case with audition, but with vision, information from one side of space, say the right side, is processed on the left side of the brain and vice versa. So here, since the deficit seems to be um, experienced as being in the left side of the space, that tells us there's some kind of injury on the right side of the brain responsible for color processing. Oh, thanks, Arshia. Opsia. So without color sight, without color vision. Um, nice. Thank you for that. Okay, so this patient was unable to recognize or name any color in any portion of the left field of either eye. And that's also helpful to keep in mind. It's the brain is contralaterally organized such that information from one side of space is processed on the other, not from one eye or the other, right? So if I have some color processing defect in my right cerebral hemisphere, then that means that anything on the left side of space, whether that's the left part of the visual field of my left eye or the left part of my right eye, I'm going to see no colors. So that's very interesting. Including bright reds, blues, greens, and yellows. As soon as any portion of the colored object crossed the vertical meridian, he was able to instantly recognize and accurately name its color. Isn't that wild, right? I'm this patient. I'm sitting in the lab, I'm looking straight ahead, and I have a vertical meridian to divide the side of space, right? And you could hold up this coffee cup in this side of space, and I could see the beautiful colored patterns there. Um, and then, wait a minute. Actually, I've just realized I don't think this is my coffee cup. Anyway, if I move it over here, I would not be able to see these colors. I would see it all in grayscale. Is this your coffee, Sarah? I think I've appropriated someone's coffee, but it works because there's actually colors on this mug that I can use for illustrative purposes. Um, so you get the idea. Dennett then continues, this patient would seem at first to be unproblematically describable as suffering a shift or a loss of color qualia in the left hemifield, the left side of their visual space. But there is a problem of interpretation here brought about by another case reported by Geschwind and Fusillo. The patient failed in all tasks in which he was required to match the seen color with its spoken name. Thus, the patient failed to give the names of colors and failed to choose a color in response to its name. By contrast, he succeeded on tasks where the matching was either purely verbal or purely nonverbal. Thus, he could give verbally the names of colors corresponding to named objects and vice versa. So you could ask him, what color are bananas? And he could say yellow. Um, he could do the opposite, or purely nonverbal, like point. Okay, banana, yellow. He could match scene colors with each other and to pictures of objects and could sort colors without error. But he couldn't do it with its spoken name, to match the color with its spoken name. Dennett says of this one, the second patient was quite unaware of any deficit. He never replied with a simple I don't know to the demand for naming a color. He just got it wrong when he tried. There is a striking contrast between these two patients. Both have impaired ability to name the colors of things in at least part of their visual field, but whereas the former is acutely aware of his deficit, the latter is not. Does this difference make all the difference about qualia? If so, what on earth should we say about this third patient? This is reported by Meadows. His other main complaint was that everything looked black or gray, and this caused him some difficulty in everyday life. He had considerable difficulty recognizing and naming colors. He would, for example, usually describe bright red objects as either red or black, bright green objects as either green, blue, or black, and bright blue objects as black. The difficulty appeared to be perceptual, and he would make remarks suggesting this. For example, when shown a bright red light, he said, a dirty, smudgy red, not as red as you would normally see red. Colors of lesser saturation or brightness were described in such terms as gray, off-white, or black, but if told to guess at the color, he would be correct on about 50% of occasions, being notably less successful with blues and greens than reds. Dennett says this man's awareness of his deficit is problematic to say the least. It contrasts rather sharply with yet another case reported by Damasio. One morning in September 1977, upon awakening, she, the patient, noted that although she was able to see details of objects and people, colors appeared drained out and not true. She had no other complaint. Her vision was good, 20/20 in each eye. The difficulty in color perception persisted, and she had to seek the advice of her husband to choose what to wear. 8 weeks later, she noted that she could no longer recognize the faces of her husband and her daughter. So, in addition to achromatopsia, the patient has prosopagnosia. This is the inability to recognize faces. But her linguistic and cognitive performances were otherwise unaffected. The patient was able to tell her story cogently and to have remarkable insight about her defects. Very interesting. All of these cases illustrate those sorts of double dissociations of function, right? Where, um, injury to one area of the brain causes a deficit in A but leaves B intact, where damage to a different area of the brain leaves A intact but causes deficits with B. This is how neuroscience unfolded as a discipline, how it grew into a science of its own by examining people with acquired brain injuries and looking for these double dissociations of function so that we could see which parts of the brain seem to be responsible for which kinds of cognitive or perceptual functions. Anyway, what is Dennett going to do with all of this? That's what we're going to take a look at now. As Meadows notes, quote, some patients thus complain that their vision for colors is defective, while others have no spontaneous complaint but show striking abnormalities on testing. I'm going to highlight this because this reminds me, right? This is the point, right? Um, these are kind of similar to some of the thought experiments that Dennett sketched out in the previous section, particularly what he does with Mr. Chase and Mr. Sunman, or with the experienced beer drinker. So, what should we say in these cases? When no complaint is volunteered, but the patient shows an impairment in color vision, is this a sign that his qualia are unaffected? His capacities to discriminate, in other words, are terribly impaired, but luckily for him, his inner life is untouched by this merely public loss. We could line up qualia this way, but equally we could claim that the patient has simply not noticed the perhaps gradual draining away or inversion or merging of his qualia revealed by his poor performance. So slowly did his inner life lose its complexity and variety that he never noticed how impoverished it had become. What if our last patient described her complaint just as she did above, but performed normally on testing? One hypothesis would be that her qualia had indeed, as she suggested, become washed out. Another would be that in light of her sterling performance on the color discrimination tests, her qualia were fine. She was suffering from hysterical or depressive anomaly, a sort of color vision hypochondria that makes her complain about a loss of color perception. Or perhaps one could claim that her qualia were untouched. Her disorder was purely verbal, an anomalous understanding of the words she uses to describe her experience. And in parentheses, other startlingly specific color word disorders have been reported in the literature. The traditional concept of qualia leads us to overlook genuine possibilities. Once we have learned of the curious deficit reported by Geschwind and Fusillo, for instance, we realize that our first patient was never tested to see if he could still sort colors seen on the left or pass other non-naming, non-verbal color blindness tests. Those tests are by no means superfluous. Perhaps he would have passed them. Perhaps, in spite of what he says, his qualia are as intact for the left field as for the right, if we take the capacity to pass such a test as critical. Perhaps his problem is purely verbal. Maybe he sees the color but can't report the colors, and thus reports that everything is grayscale. If your reaction to this hypothesis is that this is impossible, that must mean you are making his verbal reporting behavior sovereign in settling the issue. But then you must rule out a priori the possibility of the condition I described as color vision hypochondria. There is no prospect of finding the answers to these brain teasers in our everyday language usage or the intuitions it arouses. I'm going to highlight that because it reminds me again, is this a nothing or a something we can say nothing about? But of course it is open to the philosopher to create an edifice of theory defending a particular set of interlocking proposals. The problem is that although normally a certain family of stimulus and bodily conditions yields a certain family of effects, any particular effects can be disconnected and our intuitions do not tell us which of these effects are essential to quale identity or quale consistency. It seems fairly obvious to me that none of the real problems of interpretation that face us in these curious cases are advanced by any analysis of how the concept of qualia is to be applied. unless we wish to propose a novel technical sense for which the traditional term might be appropriated. But that would be at least a tactical error, perhaps a bit like we saw yesterday using élan vital to refer to something like DNA, where it used to refer to some vital principle. That would be a tactical error. The intuitions that surround and purport to anchor the current understanding of the term are revealed to be in utter disarray when confronted with these cases. My informal sampling shows that some philosophers have strong opinions about each case and how it should be described in terms of qualia. But they find they are in strident and ultimately comic disagreement with other philosophers about how these obvious descriptions should go. Other philosophers discover that they really do not know what to say, not because there are not enough facts presented in the descriptions of the cases, but because it begins to dawn on them that they have not really known what they were talking about over the years. And I'm going to highlight this too. I'll put it in blue because I think it's strongly connected with the main sort of thrust of the paper. Okay, so that's our sort of brief look at Dennett's look at these interesting cases. Just make sure I save my work as I go so that I don't lose any of my highlighting. Are there any questions so far? While you think about it, I'm going to go get my actual coffee. So I'll be right back. Well, that was weird. I thought I had a different mug and that I had reheated it in the microwave, but this is the only coffee to be found. Perhaps I misremembered which mug I retrieved from the cupboard. That's very interesting. Um, kind of related to our neuroscience discussion. But do we have any questions? And that's really, yeah, that's really interesting. I remember the cup I put in the microwave had no markings on it. Um, See how easily we can be wrong about our own experiences? And I swear to you, all I've had today is coffee, okay? So, the mug goblins, possible, although that would violate Occam's razor. Um, yeah, interesting, interesting. It's one of those sort of quotidian examples of how just how mistaken we can be of our own experiences, our own memories of those experiences, and so forth. Anyway, so we're doing pretty well in terms of time. I'd like to get somewhat through this section. Um, there is an example for which I need to go get something, which I'll probably do after the break. Yeah, it's on the very last page. So we'll do a couple more pages. Okay, filling the vacuum. If qualia are such a bad idea, why have they seemed to be such a good idea? I love it. Why does it seem as if there are these intrinsic, ineffable, private, qualitative properties of our experience? A review of the presumptive second order properties of our conscious experiences will permit us to diagnose their attractiveness and find suitable substitutes. Highlight that for maybe something to pay close attention to on a reread of the paper. This is where we get away from the empirical again and get quite philosophical, quite metaphysical, I dare say, since we're talking about the nature of properties. Consider intrinsic first. It is far from clear what an intrinsic property would be. Although the term has a certain vogue in philosophy and often seems to secure an important contrast between extrinsic properties, that is, there has never been an accepted definition of the second order property of intrinsicality. I think you can, even if you're not familiar with the literature on this, you have some appreciation for what at least what the words intrinsic and extrinsic are supposed to mean. Um, Although stop me if you don't, and I'll explain it. If even such a brilliant theory monger as David Lewis can try and fail, by his own admission, to define the extrinsic intrinsic distinction coherently, we can begin to wonder if the concept deserves our further attention after all. In fact, Lewis begins his survey of versions of the distinction by listing one option. We could quine the lot, give over the entire family as unintelligible and dispensable. But he dismisses the suggestion immediately. That would be absurd, he said. In the end, however, his effort to salvage the accounts of Chisholm and Kim are stymied, and he conjectures that if we still want to break in, we had best try another window. These ought to be some familiar names to you. David Lewis, we looked at his work in Kim. Remember when we looked at the Ramsey-Lewis method? That was a method adapted by David Lewis. And Kim, this Kim, if I'm not mistaken, is Jaegwon Kim, the author of our textbook. Let's check. We'll go down to the references section. Yep, Kim J. Psychophysical Supervenience. Yep, that's Jaegwon Kim. So David Lewis tries and fails by Lewis's own admission. This isn't Dennett being mean or anything here. To coherently define the distinction between extrinsic and intrinsic properties. It's just an example to show how tough this stuff is. Even if we are as loath as Lewis to abandon the distinction, should we not be suspicious of the following curious fact? If challenged to explain the idea of an intrinsic property to a neophyte, many people would hit on the following sort of example. Consider Tom's ball. It has many properties. Remember, properties are things that we can predicate to objects. So some of the things we can predicate to Tom's ball are that it is made of rubber from India. It belongs to Tom. It's having spent the last week in the closet, and its redness. All but the last of these are clearly relational or extrinsic properties of the ball. Its redness, however, is an intrinsic property, except that this is not so. Ever since Boyle and Locke, we have known better. Redness, public redness, is a quintessentially relational property, as many thought experiments about secondary qualities show. One of the first was Berkeley's pail of lukewarm water, and one of the best is Bennett's phenylethourea that we looked at last time. Um, I want to make sure that we're clear on what's happening here. I want to underline all of this just to make sure that I don't get ahead of myself. But I want to know if you know what's going on here with the discussion of Locke and Berkeley, etc. Any questions? First of all, have any of you read any Locke or any Berkeley? Just kind of getting a survey. I know with this course, this is a philosophy of mind course, and I do believe that one of the requirements is a first year course in philosophy of some sort. But I need to know how much explaining I need to do. Let's start with Locke. Locke, not much. I recognize Berkeley. Okay. So Locke talks about the sensible qualities of objects. We have ideas or mental representations of those sensible qualities. So take this orange. It's the same orange I used yesterday. It has certain primary qualities, and our ideas of primary qualities resemble the qualities of the object. So the orange is round. And my idea, my mental representation that the orange is round, really does resemble the primary quality of roundness in the orange. Similarly, the rough texture of the skin. I mentally represent as the orange as having a sort of rough texture. That's an idea that I have of a primary quality, a mental representation of a primary quality. And it's a primary quality which means that my ideas of that sort of quality actually resemble the quality. But then there are secondary qualities like color. My idea of the orangeness of the orange does not really resemble the qualities of the orange. Why? Because orange is in the mind of the perceiver. Um, what does the orange really look like? Maybe it doesn't even make sense to ask that. If you showed this orange to somebody who was colorblind, they might not see the orange color at all. Perhaps it would look kind of grayish. If you showed the orange to a bird or an insect, they might see other ultraviolet colors over and above the orange. Their ideas of the secondary qualities of the orange do not resemble the orange itself. But public redness is like redness we can talk about, or orangeness in this case. And you can see why this is not this that redness or orangeness cannot be intrinsic here because it's like a secondary quality. An interesting way of highlighting this is, and this is where we get to Berkeley, is or Barkley is how it's really pronounced, is this little experiment with lukewarm water, and this is to show certain quirks of our perception, right? But if you have a pail of lukewarm water, you put your hands in, both hands will feel the lukewarmness of the water. But let's say you have one hand first in very, very cold water and one hand in very, very warm water, and then you both uh, put them in the lukewarm water. The hand that was in cold water, well, that lukewarm water will feel very warm to that hand. But the hand that was in the warm water, you put that in the lukewarm water, and the lukewarm water will feel cold. Uh, it's almost like the water feels like it's two different temperatures, but it can't be two different temperatures. So the perceived temperature sensation that you have there is relational in the sense that it depends on where your other two hands were previously. One was in the hot water and one was in the cold water. So redness, colors are relational properties. They're not intrinsic. You could try and say, like with Tom's ball, its redness is intrinsic, unlike other properties like it's being made of rubber from India or that it was in the closet last week. The redness is intrinsic. Likewise, the orangeness of this orange. But at least since Locke, Berkeley, and Boyle, we've known that that can't be the case. Make sense? Okay. This seductive step, saying that there are these intrinsic properties, like the redness of Tom's ball is an intrinsic property. On learning that public redness, like public bitterness, is a relational property after all, is to cling to intrinsicality. Something has to be intrinsic after all, and we move it into the subject's head. It is often thought, in fact, that if we are a Lockean, relational position on objective bitterness, redness, etc., we must complete our account of the relations in question by appeal to non-relational intrinsic properties. If what is to be objectively bitter is to produce a certain effect in the members of the class of normal observers, we must be able to specify that effect and distinguish it from the effect produced by objective sourness and so forth. What else could distinguish this effect but some intrinsic property? Why not another relational or extrinsic property? The relational treatment of monetary value does not require, for its completion, the supposition of items of intrinsic value, value dependent of the valuer's disposition to react behaviorally. The claim that certain perceptual properties are different, in the absence of any supporting argument, is just question begging. It will not do to say that it is just obvious that they are intrinsic. It may have seemed obvious to some, but the considerations raised by Chase's quandary, remember Mr. Chase from Maxwell House, show that it is far from obvious that any intrinsic property, whatever that comes to, could play the role for the Lockean relational treatment of the public perceptual properties. Why not give up intrinsicality as a second order property altogether, at least pending resolution of the disarray of philosophical opinion about what intrinsicality might be. Until such time, the insistence that qualia uh, until such time the insistence that qualia are the intrinsic properties of experience is an empty gesture at best. No one could claim that it provides clear, coherent, understood prerequisite for theory. And I will highlight that in blue because it's kind of one of those punchy, connected to the thesis sort of ends to a paragraph. After this, we get on to ineffability. Oh, wow, we're almost done. Are there any questions so far? Again, I guess the takeaway from this bit is that if the claim is that um, qualia are intrinsic properties of conscious experience, we have this sort of folk notion of what that means, but we can't really make sense of that philosophically. So you can say like, oh yes, my experience of the orange has certain sort of intrinsic orangeness is like orange qualities. The orangeness is intrinsic to my experience. But Dennett is saying like, you don't know what you're talking about. Nobody knows. Nobody knows what that means, and we can't use that to build a theory of consciousness if we don't really know what we're talking about. That's what it boils down to. This is a real orange. I don't think I've had an orange. I've had an orange for recent classes. I have used bananas. Oh, my banana's gone. But I have a whole bunch more. Actually, mmm, that smell good. I can smell the bananas. I can't smell the orange. Yeah, I have used apples. Apples are nice because they're kind of symbolic of knowledge, right? I guess in certain traditions. In others, the pomegranate is, interestingly enough. I don't have any pomegranates around though. Um, we're going at a really good clip here. And I kind of want to know if you guys have questions or if you'd like to take a short break, because I do have to do a little bit of setup for this last bit. I've got a bit of a self-indulgent example that we're all going to try and do together, which will work best with headphones. I think if you've made it to the end of the paper, you know kind of where I'm going with this. It's not this. It's not the osprey cry. I'm not going to take you outside and go birding and look for ospreys. We have ospreys around here in North Bay. We have quite a few of them. But that's not what I intend to do. Everybody's so quiet today. Are there questions? I worry that I'm going too fast.
I don't know about everyone else, but I'm a bit too preoccupied thinking about the reflection to come up with questions.
All right. Well, yes. Well, since that is due tonight, are there questions about the reflection, or we can save
I
those till
mean,
the end if you like, or we can do them now? Sorry, who was
y-
speaking?
yeah, it's me, Buthina. I mean, let's take a break and talk about the reflection. Why not?
Okay. Yeah, before we get to the last couple of intuition pumps, sure, let's talk about the reflection. So, what are our thoughts and questions and concerns on the reflection?
Um, can I just a second? I want to ask you again about I mean, should we go ahead and ask questions?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I want to ask about the in-text citation.
Okay.
Uh, when you say you want it in-text citation, what do you like? How should it exactly look?
That depends on what citation style you're using.
Uh,
So this is why I said early on in the course and in my instructional videos that I've made available Purdue University's online writing lab, which contains multiple citation guides. Um, I recommend going with APA style, and the style guide for APA is available on um, OWL. And it's up to you to read that guide and choose a citation style. Again, I recommend APA, and to make sure you're using it properly to cite any quotation, paraphrase, or idea that is not your own. And you can see what Dennett does it here, right? See here when he's made a direct quote of these ostrich or not ostrich osprey noises. He cited the author. Here he's got a footnote, right? So this is what you want to be doing, and you've got to do it um, to ensure that you are citing things properly, right? It's all about avoiding plagiarism. So that's why Jack and I have come down pretty hard on this because a lot of students seem, and this isn't aimed at anyone in particular here today, but a lot of students are just not citing anything. And like you've got to cite your work. It's so important. Um, so Purdue OWL is where you want to start. Choose a style guide. Again, I recommend APA. Read through it, and it will tell you how to do proper in-text citations and proper references for your references section. Does that make sense?
yeah, yeah.
Okay. Uh, Grant had something in here. Grant just finished his, handed it in, saved drafts on my desktop. Now I'm on my laptop. I've only handed in one of my rough drafts. Oh, if you submit the second draft late, it's okay. I won't ding you for lateness, but make sure you get me the two drafts plus the final draft. That's actually another big problem that's kind of been ongoing, and I suspect that the students who are doing this are not the ones that are coming to lectures. Otherwise, they would know they're supposed to do this. But for each reflection assignment and the proposal, we need two early drafts and the final draft, or we do not mark your work. You can submit the draft later, but I'm not going to chase after you for it. And if the proof of work is not sufficient, we're still not going to mark it. Those are the rules that I laid out at the beginning of the course. But like if you're in a situation like Grant, you can email it to me or submit it late. I won't ding you with a late penalty. Uh, Aisha, Arshia, sometime after lecture. Well, that did I mark your work? Because if I didn't, then you want to be talking to Jack. And Jack marked most of these proposals, so chances are you're going to want to talk to him. Timothy, you've had your hand up for a bit there. Go ahead.
Oh yeah. You were talking about the in-text citations. Is
Hmm.
that like on the screen that you have shared beside theory, that little 11, is that what it's supposed to look like?
That's what a footnote looks like, or in this case, an end note. I mean,
Right.
again, like I tried to get this out of the way early. Like this is something that is incumbent upon you to go and
Right.
find
It's
out.
more so just the Peterson and the like the
So
1947. Right.
this is a parenthetical reference. It is a
Right.
type of in-text citation.
That's
Which
the one I've
type
been using, I guess. Yeah.
Yes, which type of in-text citation you use depends on the citation style you've chosen. Again,
Mhm.
I recommend APA. Make sure that you pick one and you follow it properly, right?
Mhm. Haven't been called out for it yet, so should be okay.
Good,
Yeah.
good. Then you're probably okay. You're probably okay. Um, uh, Fatum says any other essays are allowed if they're related to the course and the essay, as long as they're cited. I mean, yeah, like you want to find as much evidence as possible. Like if you're talking about identifying sources, yeah, like identify sources, real sources. Jack actually found that somebody had cited a paper that seemed to have been written by a non-existent philosopher. This was really interesting. He brought this to my attention, and he looked into it and I looked into it, and this guy has put some non-peer reviewed papers up on Phil papers, which seem to be written by AI because this person doesn't seem to exist. So I guess that's something else you have to watch out for. Um, there are AI generated papers written by real scholars who are being academically dishonest. And then there are just non-existent philosophers writing non-existent made-up papers. So that's something you'll have to be on the lookout for. You don't have to worry about it with somebody like Dennett, I think. But like this was so weird. I took the guy's profile picture and reverse image searched it, and there was nothing on the entire internet. Nothing on the searchable web anyway. And I thought that is weird. That's the first time I've ever seen anything like that. And Jack caught it. So props to Jack. It's definitely sucks. Yeah. Okay. What else? What else?
For the final essay, was it three drafts, I believe?
Yes, for the final,
Three
there
early
are
drafts.
more drafts. You want
Right.
three early drafts
Okay.
plus the final for a
Plus the
total of
final.
at least four. You can do more,
Mhm.
but I want at least four in total.
Right. And for the reflection, like about these drafts, for the reflection, usually my first draft is just the outline of ideas and like me just typing
Yeah.
out what I'm thinking I'm gonna write. And that seems to
Yeah.
have been working. That's
Yeah,
okay.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Like we wanted to show your incremental progress. I mean, Timothy, have you you haven't had a problem with your drafts, have you?
No, I haven't.
Yeah, so you're
No,
good.
great.
You're just keep doing what you're doing.
Awesome.
But if Jack and I get back to you and say there aren't enough drafts or these drafts don't show adequate proof of work, then yeah, that's not going to work. Like I had
Yeah.
one student who didn't submit proof of work, so I asked if they had any other drafts and they just sent me their notes for a lecture and I said, "Well, that's not proof of work."
I
Like,
guess not exactly the draft. A draft.
yeah. Yuntao says, just as example, if I just use content in the lecture, should I put it in reference? You should not be using my lectures as sources. And this is something I've been fairly adamant about in my feedback. I think Jack has as well. My lectures are not scholarly sources. They are just lectures. I am guiding you through scholarly sources, but you're not supposed to use my lectures. Use primary scholarly sources like, for example, Descartes or Hilary Putnam, or secondary sources like Kim's textbook or other textbooks or papers about other philosophers' work. That's what you should be using. So Fatum, if you found another Dennett essay, then yeah, absolutely. Dennett's great. What paper is it, if you don't mind me asking? What's the one you're thinking of using? Who am I? I haven't read that one. But Dennett's fun, right? So absolutely, yeah, you can use Dennett. Um Dennett is of course a scholar. He's probably one of the most influential and well-known philosophers of the late 20th and early 21st centuries. So yeah, no, you're good if you want to use Dennett. Um Okay, so do we want to take a quick break before we charge through the rest of this reading?
That'd be good.
Okay. I'm just looking. All these clocks are different times. I need that clock leprechaun from the book to come and synchronize all the clocks. Grant doesn't need a long one. Maybe we'll go for 10 minutes. Let's see. On my laptop, I have 324. So let's come back at 334. That should give me enough time. Okay. See you all shortly. Oops. Sorry. I was saying welcome back. And I was just saying that Fatum had said the paper he found was actually called "Where Am I?" um, which I also have not read. Well, not also, because the other paper is it's not a paper. But I haven't read this one. But if it's helpful for your essay, then by all means. Let's share the screen again. So we've talked about intrinsicality. Now we're going to move on to ineffability. So what then of ineffability? Why does it seem that our conscious experiences have ineffable properties? Because they do have practically ineffable properties. Suppose in Intuition Pump 13, the osprey cry, that I have never heard the cry of an osprey, even in a recording, but I know roughly from reading my bird books what to listen for. Which, a quote, a series of short, sharp, creeping whistles, cheep, cheep, or chook, chook, etc. Sounds annoyed, or words to that effect are better. The verbal description gives me a partial confinement of the logical space of possible bird cries. On its basis, I can rule out many bird calls that I have heard or might hear, but there is still a broad range of discriminable by me possibilities within which the actuality lies hidden from me like a needle in a haystack. And I got to say, I like this example because I am getting older. Well, I suppose, about to be in the midst of middle age. And one of the things you find when you get to be this age is that you start getting really into birds. I've always kind of been interested in birds, but lately it's been like, I don't know, it's really something else. Birds are just so cool. And I love to identify new birds that I haven't seen before. I've seen an osprey before. I don't think I've heard their cries, but I do see what Dennett is saying, and maybe you've shared this experience, that you've had this experience that I have. A few years ago, I got a bird book for my partner from Cornell Labs. They're a big bird laboratory at Cornell University in the States, and they do all kinds of cool bird stuff. But this book had pictures of birds, descriptions of birds, descriptions of their calls, and it also had a little um, digital sort of interface where you could um, push the right buttons and you could hear recordings of the bird calls. Nowadays, you can get apps on your phone for this, but I went for that book for a specific reason, because in in other books, you get these descriptions of sounds like cheep cheep or chook chook, but then when I find that I actually see the bird and hear its cry, it sounds nothing like the author has described it to me. But what Dennett is saying here is saying, like, look, this example sort of limits the possible sort of space, right? The verbal description, as he says here, gives me a partial confinement of the logical space of possible bird cries. If you're listening for a cheep cheep or a chook chook, you're not going to hear a bird that goes hoo hoo and think it's an osprey, right? You're going to think it's maybe an owl or a mourning dove or something. Um, so there's still on the basis that he's described this broad range of discriminable by me possibilities within which the actuality lies hidden from me like a needle in the haystack. Of course, sometimes these descriptions of sounds aren't all that great. Sometimes they are, right? Sometimes they're very onomatopoetic. So like a whippoorwill. I don't know if you've ever heard a whippoorwill, but its cries are described as, whippoorwill, whippoorwill. And they kind of do sound like that. They go like, I can't whistle very well, but they go like kind of like that. Yeah, Merlin. That's good, Grant. Yeah, no, that's the one I think my partner uses now. Yeah, it's like bird Shazam. And so like I'll be out fishing in the park. And maybe my partner comes and meets me and hears a bird she's never heard, so she gets out Shazam for birds, and it tells you like, oh, that could be this bird or this bird or this bird if it's not sure, and it tells you, oh, it's definitely this bird. But anyway, um, this one hits close to home. It's very illustrative for me. I don't know if it is for you. It is for me. You may not be old enough that you've entered your birding arc, but I certainly have. Okay, so we continue. Then one day, armed with both my verbal description and my binoculars, I identify an osprey visually, and then hear its cry. So that's what it sounds like, I say to myself, ostending, it seems, a particular mental complex of intrinsic ineffable quality. Ostending means like we're making an ostensive definition. Literally something we can point to or refer to, like, what does an osprey sound like? Listen. Doop, boop, boop, boop. That's what it sounds like, right? I dub the complex S from Wittgenstein. Rehearse it in short-term memory, check it against the bird book descriptions, and see that, while the verbal descriptions are true, accurate, and even poetically evocative, I decide that I could not do better with 1,000 words. They still fall short of capturing the qualia complex that I have called S. In fact, that is why I need the neologism S to refer directly to the ineffable property I cannot pick out by description, because it's an ostensively defined um, qualia concept. Like, what does the osprey sound like? You need to hear it to really know. My perceptual experience has pinpointed for me the location of the osprey cry in the logical space of possibilities in a way verbal description could not. It's kind of like when you hear, has anybody ever heard a bald eagle? This is a bit of a different example, but I'm curious. Any bird people out there ever go see a bald eagle somewhere?
I remember it was quite different from like how the American media portrays it.
Exactly. Yeah. Timothy and Grant says the same. In the movies, when you hear an eagle cry, what you're actually hearing is a red-tailed hawk,
Right,
because I
right,
guess
right,
they
right, right. Red
sound,
tailed hawk. Yeah.
yeah, they sound more badass, right?
Sounds
Real,
pretty awesome.
yeah, real eagles sound like little cute birds. It's it's kind of cool, but they make these little like kind of like chirpy noises, not like these screeching noises. And so when I was out in Calendar Bay last year, I go there regularly to fish, and there's a nesting pair of bald eagles there, and you can hear them from quite a ways away making their little eagle sounds. But I heard these noises and I thought, is that what an eagle sounds like in real life? And then I saw one flying to and from where I heard the noise, and I had this experience similar to Dennett, where I could finally um, ostensibly, go like, yes, that is the sound of an eagle. So I can ostend, as it were, and I can ostend my sort of qualia complex, right? But tempting as this view of matters is, it is overstated. Dennett says. First of all, it is obvious from a single experience of this sort. I do not, cannot know how to generalize to other osprey calls. Maybe there are osprey that sound different, or maybe this is just one call out of many that osprey make. Would a cry that differed only in being half an octave higher also be an osprey call? That is an empirical ornithological question for which my experience provides scant evidence. But moreover, and this is a psychological, not ornithological matter, I do not and cannot know from a single such experience which physical variations and consistencies in stimuli would produce an indistinguishable experience in me. What other kinds of physical causes would cause an indistinguishable experience of an osprey call in Dennet? Nor can I know whether I would react the same, that is, have the same experience, if I were presented with what was, by all physical measures, a re-stimulation identical to the first. I cannot know the modulating effect, if any, of variations in my body or psyche. The inscrutability of projection is surely one of the sources of plausibility of Wittgenstein's skepticism regarding the possibility of a private language. Kripke here, quoted in Dennett, said of Wittgenstein, Wittgenstein emphasizes that ostensive definitions are always in principle capable of being misunderstood, even the ostensive definition of a color word such as sepia. How someone understands the word is exhibited in the way someone goes on, the use that he makes of the word defined. One may go on in the right way given a purely minimal explanation, while on the other hand, one may go on in another way no matter how many clarifications are added, since these too can be misunderstood. And I guess to get back to bird calls, I mean, I might hear, I don't know, um, a pileated woodpecker and see it and go, oh, that's what a pileated woodpecker sounds like. And then I hear a similar call, and I think, oh, that's a pileated woodpecker. But unbeknownst to me, it's not. It's a northern flicker, which actually do sound very similar, right? I can be mistaken. Even if someone says, hear that noise, it's coming from that bird over there. That is the pileated woodpecker. Um, but I might mistake the northern flicker for the pileated woodpecker. It's perfectly possible for some of the reasons that Dennett states above here. There's certain things that I cannot know about how the physical, oscillations in the atmosphere caused by the bird affecting my sense organs. I cannot know the effect that those will have on my body or my psyche. Okay, so but what is inscrutable in a single glance and somewhat ambiguous after limited testing can come to be justifiably seen as the deliverance of a highly specific, reliable, and projectable property detector once it has been field tested under a suitably wide variety of circumstances. To try and to clarify this here. In other words, when I first hear the osprey cry, I may have identified a property detector in myself, a little osprey detector or bird detector, if you like. But I have no idea yet what property my newfound property detector detects. It might seem then that I know nothing new at all, that my novel experience has not improved my epistemic predicament in the slightest. But of course, this is not so. I may not be able to describe the property or identify it relative to any readily usable public landmarks yet, but I am acquainted with it in a modest way. I can refer to the property I detected. It is the property I detected in that event. My experience of the osprey cry has given me a new way of thinking about osprey cries, an unavoidably inflated way of saying something very simple, which is practically ineffable, both because it has, as yet for me, an untested profile in response um, to perceptual circumstances, and because it is, as the poverty of the bird book description attests, such a highly informative way of thinking, a deliverance of an informationally very sensitive portion of my nervous system. So it's like we have these property detectors, and we can talk about the properties that we detect. And there's something that's practically ineffable about all of this. But as we'll see with the next couple of examples, this is not a problem, or need not be a problem. And it doesn't show that while these aspects of our conscious experience are practically ineffable, does not mean they're like, I don't know, as a rule, or logically ineffable. In this instance, Dennett continues, I mean information in the formal information theory sense of the term. So, what is information on information theory? Anybody know? Maybe we have some computer scientists in the room who can tell us. Well, I guess one thing we can say is that information is representational on information theory. Like think of Claude Shannon, who we could have talked about when we talked about Putnam and Turing, for that matter. Claude Shannon, in the way that Turing formalized computation, Shannon formalized information in terms of binary digits or bits, which are really the type of information that can be carried by things like circuits. Yeah, the mathematical storage study of storage quantification of information. So that's where we get bits from. A bit is you know, a binary random variable with equal probability of being true or false or something like that, right? Or as I like to think of it, a bit is the amount of information you gain when you get an answer to a yes or no question. And they're binary digits. So zero, you can have one of two values, 0 or 1. 0 is false, 1 is true. And we can realize this information with, say, circuits. A circuit off is 0. A circuit on is 1. Um, these are also truth values, right? 0 is false, 1 is true. Um, so this all sort of grows out of logic and has become the foundation of all of these being able to build devices like this, right? So that's the sense of the term that Dennett has in mind. So consider intuition pump 14, the Jello box, the old spy trick, most famously encountered in the case of Julius and Ethel Rosenberg, of improving on a password system by tearing something in two, a Jello box in the Rosenbergs' case, and giving half to each other, giving half to each of the two parties who must be careful about identifying each other. Why does it work? Because tearing the paper in two produces an edge of such informational complexity that it would be virtually impossible to reproduce by deliberate reconstruction. Cutting the Jello box along a straight edge with a razor would entirely defeat the purpose, for example. The particular jagged edge of one piece becomes a practically unique pattern recognition device for its mate. It is an apparatus for detecting the shape property M, where M is uniquely instantiated by its mate. It is of the essence of the trick that we cannot replace our dummy predicate M with a longer, more complex, but accurate and exhaustive description of the property. For if we could use the description as a recipe or feasible algorithm for producing another instance of M or another M detector. The only readily available way of saying what property M is just to point to our M detector and say that M is the shape property detected by this thing here. Rather like the other piece of the Jello box is the thing that is detected by this piece of the Jello box that I have. So I'm going to highlight this because this is something you'd want to read probably once or twice. Questions? Mute my. Oh, Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay. Uh, so what happened? What did you miss? What did I what how long was I muted?
Just a few seconds.
Oh, okay. So just to go over the last few seconds, yeah, I'll just reread this. If I wonder whether your blue is my blue, your middle C is my middle C, I can coherently be wondering whether our discrimination profiles over a wide variation in conditions will be approximately the same. And they may not be. People experience the world quite differently. But that is empirically discoverable by all the usual objective testing procedures. And that's why I put the comment about the dress. Okay, questions? I guess one of the takeaways that I get from this is that Dennett is saying, like, look, there's a sort of privacy and ineffableness in the sense that there's a practical ineffability, and there's a privacy in the sense that we all have these idiosyncratic sort of property detectors that obstance differently, but qualia are not ineffable beyond that. And these are all things that we can reasonably talk about too, things that we can know about. So qualia are not as private or ineffable or intrinsic as they're supposed to be. Peter Bieri has pointed out to me that there is a natural way of exploiting Dretski's sense of information in a reformulation of my first three second-order properties of qualia: intrinsicality, ineffability, and privacy. Um, we don't. I'll just read this. I'm not going to get too far into Dretski because I'm not super knowledgeable about Dretski. Um, and there are problems, Dennett thinks, with this, but they don't really apply here, which is neither here nor there, I suppose. We could speak of what Bieri would call phenomenal informational properties of psychological events. Consider the information, what Dretski would call the natural meaning that a type of internal perceptual event might carry. Here we mean natural meaning in the sense that, like, smoke means fire. Um, that's about as far as I'm willing to go into Dretski, just because it's not terribly complicated. I just don't know it very well. That it carries that information is an objective, and hence in a loose sense, intrinsic matter, since it is independent of what information, if any, the subject takes the event to carry. So smoke represents fire regardless of whether I know about smoke and fires. Exactly what information is carried is practically ineffable for the reasons just given, and it is private in the sense just given, proprietary and potentially idiosyncratic. Now consider how Bieri's proposed phenomenal information properties, let us call them pips, would apply in the case of Chase and Sanborn. Chase's speech shows that he is under the impression that his pips are unchanged under normal circumstances. All bets are off if he has just eaten horseradish. So under normal circumstances, Chase maintains that his pips are the same. The coffee tastes the same. His phenomenal information properties have stayed the same. The coffee tastes the same. He just doesn't like it anymore. He believes that the same objective things in the world, in particular chemically identical caffeine-rich fluids, give rise to to his particular types of taste experiences now as 6 years ago. Sanborn is under the impression that his pips are different because his tasters have changed. That's what he believes. He thinks his objective property detectors are deranged. He no longer has confidence that their deliverances today inform him of what they did 6 years ago. His tasters have changed, and so the coffee tastes different to him than it did 6 years ago. And what exactly did they inform him of then, 6 years ago? If Sanborn were an ordinary person, we would not expect him to have an explicit answer, since most of us treat our taste detectors as mere M detectors, detecting whatever it is that they detect. And there are good reasons for this, analyzed by Atkins 1987, which take a look in the references section. But professional coffee tasters are probably different. They probably have some pretty good idea of what kind of chemical analysis transduction machinery they have in their mouths and nervous systems. So far, so good. We could reinterpret Chase's and Sanborn's speeches as hypotheses about the constancies or change in the outputs of their perceptual information processing apparatus. And just the sort of empirical testing we imagined before would tend to confirm or disconfirm their opinions thus interpreted. So, not so private, not so ineffable. But what would justify calling such an information-bearing property phenomenal? Such a pip has, as the testimony of Chase and Sanborn reveals, the power to provoke in Chase and Sanborn acts of apparent re-identification or recognition. This power is, of course, a Lockean dispositional property on a par with the power of bitter things to provoke a certain reaction in people. It is this power alone, however it might be realized in the brain, that gives Chase and Sanborn access to the deliverances of their individual property detectors. We may point inwardly, quotes, to one of the deliverances of our idiosyncratic proprietary property detectors, but when we do, what are we pointing at? What does that deliverance itself consist of? Or what are its consciously apprehensible properties, if not just our banished friends, the qualia? We must be careful here, for if we invoke an inner perceptual process in which we observe the deliverance with some inner eye and thereby discern its properties, we will be stepping back into the frying pan of the view according to which qualia are just ordinary properties of our inner states. I'm going to underline this because I think it would be worth a second pass later. But nothing requires us to make such an invocation. We do not have to know how we identify or re-identify or gain access to such internal response types in order to be able to identify them. This is a point that was forcefully made by the pioneer functionalists and materialists, and has never been rebutted. The properties of the thing experienced are not to be confused with the properties of the event that realizes the experiencing. To put the matter vividly, the physical difference between someone's imagining a purple cow and imagining a green cow might be nothing more than the presence or absence of a particular 0 or 1 in the brain's registers. Such a brute physical presence is all that it would take to anchor the sorts of dispositional differences between imagining a purple cow and imagining a green cow that could then flow causally from that intrinsic fact. I doubt this is what the friends of qualia have in mind when they have insisted that qualia are intrinsic properties. So maybe there is some intrinsicality here, but not in the sense in which we ordinarily understand what that term means. Moreover, it is our very inability to expand on or modify these brute dispositions so to identify or recognize such states that creates the doctrinal illusion of homogeneity or atomicity to analysis or grainlessness that characterizes the qualia of the philosophical tradition. This putative grainlessness, I hypothesize, is nothing but a sort of functional invariability. It is close kin to what Pilishin calls cognitive impenetrability. In other words, there are mental, cognitive, perceptual processes that our beliefs just cannot affect. Like perceptual illusions. You can experience an illusion like, say, some of the edge or the boundary illusions in this very paper, or famously the Mueller-Lyer illusion, the Ebbinghaus illusion, the moon illusion. Pick any illusion you want. You can know that it's an illusion, and your belief that what you are seeing is illusory will not remove the illusion because it takes place at a lower level, sort of cognitively impenetrable level of processing, right? Maybe there's something similar going on here. Moreover, this functional invariability or impenetrability is not absolute, but itself plastic over time. Just as on the efferent side of the nervous system, basic actions have been discovered to be variable and subject to training under decomposition. So, for example, one can learn with the help of biofeedback to will the firing of a particular motor neuron directly. So, what counts for an individual as the simple or atomic properties of experienced items is subject to variation with training. This is getting us to another example where I am going to try and show you um, what's going on. Maybe you have your own simple sort of example that you've applied to this once you read it, but I get this hits very close to home. Consider the results of educating the palate of a wine taster or ear training for musicians. What had been atomic or unanalyzable becomes noticeably compound and describable. Pairs that had been indistinguishable become distinguishable, and when this happens, we say the experience changes. Highlight in blue. This is so important, so illustrative. A swift and striking example of this is illustrated in Intuition Pump number 15, the guitar string. Pluck the bass or low E open string and listen carefully to the sound. Does it have describable parts, or is it one and whole and ineffably guitarish? Many will opt for the latter way of talking. Now pluck the open string again and carefully bring a finger down lightly over the octave fret to create a high harmonic. Suddenly a new sound is heard. Purer, somehow, and of course an octave higher. Some people insist that this is entirely novel sound, while others will describe the experience by saying the bottom fell out of the note, leaving just the top. But then on the third open plucking, one can hear with surprising distinctness the harmonic overtone that was isolated in the second plucking. The homogeneity and ineffability of the first experience is gone, replaced by a duality that is directly apprehensible and clearly describable as that of any chord. I'm going to underline this, and then I'm going to try and go off headphones for a minute. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Very
Yes.
good. Bear with me a moment. How many of you play a musical instrument? Okay, Grant does. You might like this. This is my '89 American Fender Strat Plus. Yeah. It's got lace sensor gold pickups, maple board, maple neck, Wilkinson rolling nut, Spurzl locking tuners, TBX tone control, floating bridge with a hip shot trem setter. In '89, this guitar would have been like buying a sports car, you know? But that's not why I brought it out. I brought it out because I wanted to show you what Dennett is talking about. How's it sound? Well, maybe it needs to be louder. Can you hear that? Turn off the mic setting from Zoom. Uh, oh, that cuts out background noise. Okay. You've had to do this before, eh? Can you hear that? Playing music. Yes, I am playing music. Set up professional audio. Uh, spatial audio. Um, Noise removal. Let's remove that. Original sound for musicians. Oh, okay. Live performance audio. Can you hear that? Okay. Okay. Good. Sound check complete. Now, if you play an instrument, you kind of know this, but what Dennett's sort of gesturing at here is there's this sort of ineffableness to, I don't know, say the low E string, right? That's the low E string, which is an E2, I believe, in musical parlance. And it just sounds like how would you describe that? Just kind of guitar-ish? Low, twangy. It's pretty twangy. I can make it more twangy if I change the pickup. See, now it's more twangy. Sounds kind of like country when you do that. Country like. I'm more of a blues guy, though. Now, if you're not a musician, there is a sort of practical ineffability there. But what Dennet is talking about here, if I take my finger and put my finger over the octave fret and pluck the string, I will get a harmonic of this low E string. Hear that? This is the string without the harmonic. With the harmonic. How would you describe that? Yeah, Grant, yes, because you play the guitar. Before I started playing the guitar, I used to describe them as sort of like bell-like. So those are harmonics that I can get on this string. Like the ring after a bell is tapped. Yeah, like. I guess you could describe them as leftover noise. Pretty leftover noise with sparkles. But here's the interesting thing. Those sounds are what make up this note. So the physicists in the room will know about the harmonic series. Correct? When I play this low E, this note is made up of all these harmonics, etc., as well as all of what we call partials. The harmonics are whole multiples of the fundamental frequency. I don't remember the fundamental frequency of E2 off the top of my head, but all these harmonics are integer multiples of the fundamental. Actually, can someone look that up? What is the frequency of E2? Someone look that up for me. I'll just noodle while you do that. About 84. So all of the harmonics 82. Okay. So all of our harmonics are going to be integer multiples of the fundamental, and then the partials are going to be somewhere in between there. You can hear the partials like here's a harmonic, but then I'm going through all the harmonics and partials. The harmonics are what are responsible for what we hear as pitch, and the partials are what are responsible for what we hear as timbre, which is everything about music that is not pitch. So, now it sounds kind of bluesy, like, but then I can make it more twangy if I change the pickup, right? That's timbre. Now, somebody who trains their ear can start to hear those harmonics. So, when you've trained your ear and you listen to music very closely, you can hear the sounds that sounds are made of. I'm telling you this from experience. So, Anyone? Are there actually? I haven't asked if we have any music students in this course, but I wonder if any of you might be music students, or whether you have some ear training, and whether you can hear the sounds within the sounds. Oh, tell me more, Samar. Okay, Grant was in a band and could at a point. Samar, tell me more. What sort of music do you listen to where you hear the sounds within the sounds? Yeah, okay, that bass is a good example because bass, I find that the lower that you go, the easier it is to hear those harmonics. There are some like grand pianos, actually. I forget the company, but there's a type of grand piano that actually has some extra keys toward the lower end of the keyboard, so they can actually go lower. And the interesting thing is, like, the lower a pitch is, the harder a time we have of hearing the fundamental frequency, because we can only hear her down to about 19 or 20 hertz. So once you get like really low, like the lower end of a grand piano, or like a subharmonic bass, or like an octo bass, one of those basses that's like up to the ceiling and you need to stand on a ladder to play it, we actually can't hear the fundamental frequency very well, and so the harmonics come out very nicely. There are also tricks you can do in studio or in a live venue with echo, with reverb, which really bring out the harmonics of, say, a vocalist's performance. And you can hear at certain points, it almost sounds like a vocalist is singing more than one note at a time. And that's because you're hearing harmonics over the fundamental frequency. Yeah. Yeah, if I'm listening to, Grant says, if I'm listening to an orchestra, I can still notice when they are in tune. Yeah. Yeah. And also, you're getting a little bit of reverberation, Grant. So you're getting echoes, and certain frequencies are more or less pronounced depending on the surface that they've echoed off of. It's all physics, It's really cool. Okay, so a specific sound. On the way up here, I was listening to my 80s bangers playlist. And Take Me Home Tonight by Eddie Money came on. Great song. Which features Ronnie from the Ronettes as a sort of guest vocalist. And when she is singing, I can't play it right now on the guitar, but the point is when Ronnie is singing, you go and listen to the song on headphones and you'll hear exactly what I mean. When she is singing, it sounds like she's singing low and high at the same time, because you are getting those harmonics thanks to the way they've been amplified in the mix. So go and listen and you'll know exactly what I mean. Another one is anytime Floor Jansen sings Ghost Love Score with Nightwish live, and she does her ending. There's so much reverb, and her voice is so rich that you hear these notes that you're like, where are those notes coming from? It's just absolutely sublime. So those are a couple of examples. Grant's got another one. I recorded a couple songs, and the way I would record the guitars is by recording fully pan left and another fully pan right, specifically for this reason. Yeah, I've heard of that, where you put bass in the middle and then you have a left guitar, right guitar, and it creates a sort of space, like a soundscape, right? You can't hear that with what I'm doing now, because I only have an amp and amplifiers are in mono. But if you're mixing in stereo, you can get these sorts of effects. So, yeah, this is cool. I love this because this is an intersection between art, physics, philosophy, psychology, fucking perception. See, I got really excited there. I dropped the F-bomb. This is really cool. Like, it's so cool. Why does my middle C sound like yours? I don't care. I'm more interested in trying to understand why my middle C sounds the way it does. And this is why. Like, this is so cool. All of this dovetails really nicely with what Dennet says. So, just with this little lesson, you can go and you can start listening closely to things. Some of the examples I've told you, or find your own. And you will start to hear the sounds within the sound. You won't just hear, boring old E string. Ah, that's another one. Yeah, Mongolian throat singers. They are using overtones. So they are singing like one fundamental frequency. But then when they change the shape of their mouth, they are getting more of the overtones. So that's a great example. Go listen to Bathory Vanzig or The Who, and you'll hear. Yeah, beatboxing too. There's also a classically trained vocalist. She's from Europe. I can't remember her name, but she does like Western overtone singing, and it's really wild. If you listen to any of these examples, you will know what I mean. And then when you go and listen to music, you'll realize, like, I'm hearing things I haven't heard before. Now, as Dennett says at the end of this paragraph, the homogeneity and ineffability of the first experience is gone, replaced by a duality as directly apprehensible and clearly as describable as that of any chord. Okay. The difference in experience is striking, but the complexity apprehended on the third plucking was there all along. So all of this was here all along. You just didn't notice it. After all, it was by the complex pattern of overtones that you were able to recognize the sound as that of a guitar rather than that of a lute or a harpsichord. Again, what Dennett is talking about is timbre. In other words, although the subjective experience has changed dramatically, the pip has not changed. You are still responding, as before, to a complex property so highly informative that it practically defies verbal description. So these are only like practically ineffable, but not really, not necessarily ineffable. There is nothing to stop further refinement of one's capacity to describe this heretofore ineffable complexity. At any time, of course, there is one's current horizon of distinguishability, and that horizon is what sets, if anything does, what we should call the primary or atomic properties of what one consciously experiences. But it would be a mistake to transform the fact that inevitably there is a limit to our capacity to describe things we experience into the supposition that there are absolutely indescribable properties in our experience. So there aren't these ineffable, indescribable properties. There is a sort of difference in ability in describing the properties, if you like. And whether you're talking music or wine tasting or food or, whatever, coffee, whatever you want to point to, there are ways in which you can train yourself to pick out and describe these properties that were always present in your experience. So when we look one last time at our original characterization of qualia as ineffable, intrinsic, private, directly apprehensible properties of experience, we find that there is nothing to fill the bill. Let's give that a blue highlight. In their place are relatively or practically ineffable public properties we can refer to indirectly via reference to our private property detectors, private only in the sense of idiosyncratic. And insofar as we wish to cling to our subjective authority about the occurrence within us of states of certain types or with certain properties, we can have some authority, not infallibility or incorrigibility, but something better than sheer guessing, but only if we restrict ourselves to relational extrinsic properties like the power of certain internal states of ours to provoke acts of apparent re-identification. So contrary to what seems obvious at first blush, there simply are no qualia at all. And thus, Daniel Dennet has quined qualia. All right. Any questions? Everybody's happy we're finished. I should have learned that song before class, but I am out of practice. I didn't get to practice at all when I was in Ottawa recently. Didn't bring my guitar with me. Well, I have guitars there, but I was just too busy. Are there any questions about what we've covered today or anything else? Yes, you do, Grant. You do. Everyone needs to pick up their musical instrument. Timothy, go ahead.
Can we get an extension for the reflection until Friday?
Um,
It's just kind of weird not like to
well,
have
I
it.
made it due on the last day of class, which is the last day that I can really do that. But
Oh,
I
right.
mean, if you want to hand it in on Friday, I might just overlook that it's a day late. Wink,
Well,
wink.
hopefully I'll hand it in today, but we'll see.
Yeah, yeah. You know what? Like, I'm not gonna. It's officially due tonight, but if it gets handed in before midnight tomorrow, I will just not apply any late penalties for anybody. How's that sound?
Sounds great.
Sounded really good.
Of course, I'll try to get it in tonight, but it's
Yes,
always
yes,
better
try.
to
But
be
if not, it's not the end of the world.
great.
Yeah, it is a dense essay. It does make sense. Dennett is an eliminativist. I don't know if he's really a reductionist. I mean, I think at first, you have this reaction like, what? No, of course I have qualia. But the way Dennett lays it out, like I dig what he's saying there. It makes sense to me. Of course, you'll want to probably sit with this for a little bit. Because it is tricky stuff. Like, Dennett is an excellent writer and explains things very well. But I think that the subject matter he's dealing with is just really hard to think about. I mean, as he says in the beginning of Consciousness Explained, like, consciousness is just about the last surviving mystery. A mystery is something we don't know how to think about yet. And Dennett is trying to figure out how to think about it. So. Really? Oh. You're no longer a dualist. You're welcome. Well, no. Dennett does not deny free will. Dennett has books and books and papers and everything on this. If you're interested in free will and you like Daniel Dennett, check out some of his stuff for sure. Please forgive my noodling. I haven't touched this in about a week, so. And I just like to play some blues from time to time on this thing. It's such a bluesy guitar. I always feel so self-indulgent when I play in front of other people for educational purposes. But I've done this once or twice before. I used to teach a philosophy of music class, so I would have to teach people about the harmonic series. And I thought, what better way to bring my guitar and just play some notes and then some harmonics so that people hear the notes that they've heard all along but didn't realize were there, right? Yeah, it was a first year seminar. I'd really like to do like an upper, like second or third year level thing, like music and the mind. I think would be pretty sick. Oh, thanks, Samar. And like and look, I'm sorry. Like that's why I'm apologizing so much. Like I am rusty. I am nowhere near as good as I used to be. I was almost going to be a musician way back when, but my parents were like, "Oh, you need to do something where you'll make a living." And so I thought, well, what would really financially secure my future is becoming a philosopher. So that's what I did instead. But I still play the guitar, not as much as I used to, but I try to keep my chops up, and at least enough so that I can, give you like the demonstration of the harmonics, right? A philosopher who's got tenure probably makes more than the average musician. I don't. I'm a contract guy. Like I'm on contract. I'm what they call a term instructor or a teaching track professor. I mean, I'm doing okay, but it's hard. I mean, even if you're a touring musician and you're getting gigs and you're playing consistently, like my sister-in-law sings for a band called Tommy Youngstein, and they'll do like whole album covers, like they do Fleetwood Mac. Well, they'll cover like all of Rumors and then sing some other songs. She sings the Stevie Nicks stuff. They've done Paul Simon's Graceland before. They've done Bruce Springsteen. They're touring and they're getting gigs and they're making money. But she'll make like a few $100 a gig. It's you can make money, but it's a grind. Then again, so is being a teacher. Really one or the other. I think I've done all right doing this. I think I would have done all right as a musician, but I wouldn't have. If I'd stayed a musician, I wouldn't have learned about Daniel Dennett and Jaegwon Kim and consciousness and the philosophy of mind. So I'm thankful that I've had the opportunity to really learn all of these fascinating things about the mind, the nature of the mental, and I still have music. But I also have this new way of understanding how the musical mind works and how the mind works more generally and what kind of thing the mind is. Yeah, the zombie. So he does the zombie blues. What consciousness is, I ain't got a clue, because I got a case of the zombie blues. I should actually. I've been toying with the idea of doing my own version of that. Do that blues lick. What consciousness? I can't sing, but what consciousness is, I ain't got a clue. Because I got a case of the zombie blues, right? It would go like that. I don't know.
Have you found a good correlation between having a PhD and making more money?
Yeah, there is.
There is? Okay.
There is. But again, the catch is employability. Philosophy is a very competitive field. That said, my PhD is not in philosophy, right? It's in cognitive science. So this is not to discourage you from taking more philosophy courses, by the way.
I just take them because I like them.
Yeah, you should take them because philosophy is, if there is one thing that's intrinsically valuable, I think it is philosophy. I know we've just tried to dispel our notions of intrinsicality here by reading Dennett, but I do think philosophy is worth doing for its own sake. It's not a means to an end, it's an end in itself. It's intrinsic in that sense. And that's not to say that it doesn't have other benefits. It helps you to learn more, to think critically. It really helps you with your reading and your writing. And I think in the age that we're in now, this age of AI, those skills are incredibly valuable. So philosophy is both instrumentally and intrinsically valuable. So I definitely would not want to discourage you from taking more philosophy, nor would I want to discourage you from playing music or making art of any kind. You know, if you like making music or you like making visual art or film, photography, sculpture, right? Like, again, we're in the age of AI. AI is supposed to be curing cancer and flipping burgers for us. Instead, we're getting it to make art. No, that's backwards. We need humans to make art. So I need you. You guys have got to go out there and keep doing these human things, learning philosophy, making art, appreciating art. You got to do it. It's the only way we'll beat back this stupid generative AI nonsense. All right, rant over. Do you have any questions before we go? I agree, Arshia. I absolutely agree. Generative AI is so bad. I don't like it. There are good things about AI, okay? But the generative stuff and the uses it's being put toward now are awful, and I hate it. Yeah, like data mining, machine learning. Well, data mining, I don't know. Depends what we're mining and what we're using it for. But yeah, like protein folding or like visual search. Like we could probably get AI to if not already be better than human physicians at catching, say, like cancer in medical images. It would be a great tool to use alongside human experts for like identifying disease and stuff and curing it. Like, yeah, absolutely. We should absolutely be using AI for that. You should not be using it to write your essay or make music or movies or any of this. No, that is just evil. Oh, it is on Arshia. That's nice. You don't have to do that. But if you want to, it's on ResearchGate. Ooh, what happened there? It's like you could get. I heard one GNR. Not really. I mean, I kind of grew up with them because Northern Ontario. You got two choices. Well, you got three choices for radio. You got your classic rock station, you got your pop station, and you got CBC. And I would listen to the classic rock stations. So I grew up with them. It's not what I listen to, but I know a lot of it. What was I gonna say? Oh, cool. Yeah, Slash. Well, he's a great guitar player. I'm going to see Rush this summer, which I am absolutely floored about. Yeah, I got tickets. I'm going. Taking my girlfriend. We're going to go see Rush. Yeah, I've always loved Rush. So, yeah, make human stuff, make art, learn about the way the mind works, learn philosophy. Are there questions about... I have a question for all of you, actually. I always like to ask this question at the end of my courses. Actually, it's two questions. Do you feel like you learned a lot? Yes. Yes, good. That's good. That's great. That's what I love to hear. A lot of new things. Kim is tough. It's tough. He's a great philosopher, but very technical sort of writer, right? But you probably are now a better reader, right? In addition to learning all of this stuff, you're better readers, you're better writers, better thinkers. Timothy, I'm glad you say that because that was my second question. Who feels like they know They know that they know less than they thought they did when they started. Yeah. And that's philosophy, right? You will learn a lot, and one of the things you will learn is how much you still don't know. And I think, other than everything I've tried to teach you about the mind, that's one thing I want you to keep in mind. It's great to learn. Never stop learning. But one of the things that you'll constantly be reminded of as you learn more is how much you still don't know. And indeed, how much, just as a species, we still haven't figured out. Never forget that. If I could give you one piece of advice, it would be, other than all the other advice, don't forget that. That's one thing philosophy is great for teaching us. Are there questions about the essay? And keep in mind, I will be keeping an open door policy. Oh, that's great, Storm. Yeah. Well, I'll be keeping an open door policy over the exam period. So all I'm really going to be doing is marking the second reflection assignments along with Jack. And if you run into some problem with your essay, you get stuck and you need a little help or advice or anything, just reach out. Jack marked most of the proposals. So if you have questions about any of your feedback, he'd probably be the one to ask, unless I marked your work. But if you have just sort of general essay writing questions or anything like that, then I'm happy to help. I'm sure Jack would be happy to talk to you too if he has time. Although I don't intend to volunteer his time for him. But reach out to us. Timothy.
Right. So I received nice feedback on my proposal.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like there could have been a bit more to help me produce this very strong paper that Jack seems to be expecting me to already know how to produce.
Well, if you wanted to ask him for advice, I'm sure he'd be happy to impart some.
Right. Should I be messaging him, emailing him, I guess?
Yeah. If he marked it, then if there's anything you want to follow up on, follow up with Jack. If I marked it, follow up with me.
All right, great.
Yeah. Anything else?
Yeah, I have a question about the citations.
Sorry, about
I have a
what?
question. I have a question about the citations.
Yeah.
Oh, it's weird. I can hear myself in the mic. My last two references were not scholarly. Are we allowed to use non-scholarly sources in this essay?
It really depends on what you're using them for. I cover this in my essay writing lecture, right? You can use them perhaps for illustrative purposes. You could use journalistic sources. You can use non-scholarly sources for illustrative purposes. Like Dennett does that here. He refers to characters, made up characters in literature, historical people. You can do that, but for illustration rather than as evidence.
Okay.
Yeah. And of course, if you're taking the sci-fi route where you're, philosophizing about some episode of Star Trek or something, then of course cite the episode. Make sense?
No, because I did. I think for mine, it was more of the existence of the topic.
Okay.
It is exist. It's. I did obviously get the primary literature, but also somebody's interpretation of the primary literature on how it's a valid way of thinking.
Okay, yeah. So I would just say keep my rules of thumb in mind, right? If there's something scholarly you can cite as evidence or to establish something, do it. If you're just going for illustrative purposes, other stuff might be okay, but you need to be kind of discriminating about it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anything else before I let you go?
Are we be able to send you like the final draft before to do to get your overall like
No.
opinion?
No. That's what the proposal's for. But what you can do is if you're in town, you can take it to writing services in the library and they'll look over parts of it. But yeah, no. If I did that for one of you, I'd have to do it for every one of you, and I do not have time to do it for every one of you. So that's why I have you do the proposals. Okay, last chance for questions. Timothy.
I guess if we got a decent or good grade on the proposal, then we can sort of infer you or Jack liked the topic. Like,
It's not about how much we like the topic, it's
Like,
how
agreed with
well
it, I
you
guess.
execute the
Okay.
assignment.
okay, it could be not the best topic, but we executed it well or poorly.
Well, you want a good topic, but like make sure you're following the instructions we've given you.
Right. I guess there are more instructions on the essay itself.
Yeah, like I've there's the template with the instructions. I've done a whole video
Right.
lecture. Like
Yep.
there's a lot of instructions.
Yeah.
You want to make sure you're following them.
Just following the instructions.
Yeah, because that's also what I'm doing. I'm like, I'm like, how good of an essay can you produce, and how closely have you followed the instructions for the assignment? Some people don't do. Some people pick great topics, but they just don't do it right. And I'm like, I'd love to give this an A, but I can't. It's like a B minus because you didn't do it right, right? So, yeah. I will say the final thing: don't stress too much. Remember, I'm here to answer your questions, and so is Jack. If you follow the instructions and you pay attention to our feedback, you will probably do pretty good on the final paper. So, with that, I think it's time to go. I kind of want to go and practice now, and I don't have much else to say. But thank you, thanks Samar and Tara and Fatum and everybody, and I want to thank all of you for a great class, especially those of you who were here regularly for the in-person lectures, because you make it fun. You make it so that I'm not just talking to a screen, right? So thank you all. It was a pleasure to tell you about the nature of the mental. I hope you learned something. I'm sure you did. I even learn some things every time I teach this class too. So thanks again from, really, thank you to all of you for tuning in. And I'm looking forward to reading your essays. If you got any questions at all in the meantime, please feel free to reach out. Otherwise, go write some really great essays and then enjoy your summer. Okay?
Thank you for a great semester.
Thank you. Really.
Better go write my reflection before I'm late on that.
Yeah. Remember, Friday's okay.
All right. Perfect.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye, everyone. This was a blast. Thank you all so much. Take
Bye.
care.